Hello, everybody. Welcome to Have You Ever Heard? This has been a really fun season for me because I'm getting to talk to some of my favorite people on the planet, favorite voices, favorite writers. And today, one of the ultimate, Bob Bailey, is with me. And we're going to be talking about his 1983 album, I'm Walkin', a classic record. And we're going to unpack it a little bit. And I think it's still really important today, but we'll get to that. How are you, Bob? How are you?
I am blessed and highly favored and just so honored to be with you.
Well, I mean, you are. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I said, Bob is Nashville royalty in many ways and larger than
Really?
Nashville. But I mean, here you are really, I mean, you are somebody that I think should be way more celebrated than you even, than you are. I think you're such a, incredible voice and heart. And that pen of yours is really dangerous. And so just a
Well,
joy.
as far as the accolades and recognition and all of that kind of stuff, I think I learned early on in my life that I was a star to the Most High, and that's all that matters. So all of the rest of it is cream. If somebody recognizes me or loves the music and is ministered to by it, that's a beautiful thing. But I'm already grand.
That's right. That's right. Well, I want to talk a little bit and go back because, you know, I first heard you as a PTL singer
Uh-huh.
back in the late 70s,
Yeah.
and this piece of work came out, Looking
Yes.
Forward,
Yeah.
and you are, an anomaly in many ways for the field that you were in at
Mm-hmm.
the time, because CCM was, um, shall we say, largely white
Mm-hmm.
and easy listening.
And
Easy.
unresponsive to anything that wasn't. Um, for the most part, I think I had sort of tuned it out for the most part. There's some things that get in now every now and then, and I marvel at them, and I'm amazed by them. But my heart was hurt so bad during that period that I had to walk away and leave it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to say, like, there were people like you, Danny Bell Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I would even say, to another extent, in another way, people
Mm-hmm.
that were, there were white artists that were pushing the envelope musically and trying to expand the palette
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say this, I love these artists, the BJ Thomases
Oh
and
sure.
the Imperials. I love those artists, but that
Oh my
really
God.
was the only representation, the only
Mm-hmm.
sound that was coming out. And then we had also, other folks doing another extreme. We had Res Band, and but then
Right.
you found yourself on a label that really was at the center of, on one level, expanding the sound. I've always
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask you, and we've never talked about this, how you
Mm-hmm.
came to be at Light.
Well, it's a long story, but the short version is when I moved to Nashville, I signed a record deal with a small production company in Nashville called 19th Street Productions. That first record with the four faces you saw, Looking Forward, was made for a label in Scottsdale, Arizona, and you'll have to have me back on to talk about the machinations of that project.
Yes.
In a nutshell, a friend of mine, Bob Krogstad, who's now with the Lord, came to me with an invitation for a record deal and said, um, "We can spend $40,000 on a project. We can go to London and record strings. We can do. I mean, we can hire any musician you want for this record." And of course, I jumped at the chance. I was still at PTL at the time. The record was finished and pressed, and the head of the record label looked at the cover and said, "Oh, heck no, I'm not going to release it." And the record had already pre-sold about 30,000 copies. He allowed those 30,000 copies to be sold, and then he offed the master. And a small production company in Nashville, headed by Elwin Raymer, God bless him, coughed up the $42,000 and bought the master and re-released that record on Benson, which is
That's
another
how I
story.
have it.
Save it for later.
Yes.
um,
Wow.
but in the process, I moved to Nashville, signed a publishing deal with the same company, and started writing songs and wrote the songs for I'm Walkin.
Wow.
And when the songs were completed, they negotiated a distribution deal with Light. So
Okay.
19th Street still owned the masters, but they leased the masters to Light.
Got it. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you were on Light, but not of it in a sense.
Exactly.
Got
Exactly.
it. Okay.
I was happy for any association. Andre Crouch is a mentor and an icon to me, and to be anywhere close to him was just an awesome experience for me. And
Well,
of
and I
course,
want
that's not to mention Walter Hawkins and all of the other lovely, and Tremaine and all of the other great Light artists. But yeah.
But that was a rich period at Light too, because at that point they still, I think, Reba Rambo's last Light record came out.
Oh dear God, we haven't even talked about Reba. Oh my God, yes, groundbreaking. You know, I can remember watching that Grammy show that year when her record won with all of the different artists that were on the project. It was just spellbinding, spellbinding.
A Light project, a Light
Exactly.
Records project, once again.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, that was coming into Light through a distribution deal. Were they also marketing the record?
They were marketing the record, and it was an uphill battle from the beginning. I just don't think they ever understood what the record was trying to say, or how to market it. If you had melanin in your skin, then you were supposed to emote in a certain way. You were supposed to present yourself in a certain way. If you didn't scream, if you didn't sweat, if you didn't, jump over pews in the presentation of your music, then your music was not Black, and they were not about to market you to white people. So it was just that simple. And so they took the project, they worked it, but they didn't know how to work it. And after a period of time, I got a call from Bill Cole. I don't know if you remember who he was. He was the VP there.
Yes.
And after I would fly out to LA, he wanted to take me to dinner. And I did. And at that dinner, he basically told me that the label was dropping me because there was not a place for me. They did not know how to market me. Black churches were not accepting the music, and white churches were not accepting the music. It was just sort of an outlier. So they were divesting themselves of the project, which was devastating to me. And I left that meeting with my tail between my legs and got on a plane, came back to Nashville to an apartment I was living in, and went to the mailbox, and there was a telegram from Naris saying that record had been nominated for a Grammy.
Wow.
So in that moment, it was like the spirit was saying to me, look, it doesn't matter what human beings think you ought to be doing. I think this is where you need to be going. You're on the right path. You stay there.
Well, I mean, I'm talking to another artist this season who had very similar experience in terms of them not knowing how to market a record, Donna McElroy.
Of course. Yeah.
Same experience. I mean, in the sense, the same experience, because the labels, it was too contemporary for gospel radio, too black for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
CCM, and
Mm-hmm.
there was no where for that record to be marketed, they thought.
Right.
And so this is interesting, because what you were making, I mean, this record is it's a pioneering record, because this music is the norm. This kind of songwriting has become how many gospel artists are writing,
Sure.
um, in the sense of not sticking to the rigid traditional gospel subject matter. They're
Right.
writing about life in a
Right.
greater,
And
more expanded.
it's really about, Tim, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's really just to me it's about um, um, collecting all of the influences and the sounds and sights and smells and whatever that surround you, and turning that into your essence, turning that into what your sound is. And I just get so angry when outside forces um, want to lecture me about how I should be influenced. Like, I can't listen to Joni Mitchell. You know, I can't listen to Andre. I can't listen to Tremaine. I can't listen to Stevie. I can't listen to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I can't listen to all of the disparate and various influences that I love, and have that distilled into something that is uniquely me. It's like they instead of listening to it with an open heart, they come at it from a corporate view sometimes, and they
Yes.
come at it from a monetary view. They have they have certain entrenched um, income streams. They know where to make money in very limited ways. So
Yes.
you need to fit into one of these income streams, or they don't want to be bothered. When, if they would take a chance, I mean, imagine the record label that took a chance on Joni Mitchell,
Yes.
or Paul Simon, or
Laura
Billy
Nero.
Joel, or any
Yes.
any any artist. When that artist first got started, nobody knew what their music was about.
No.
So, but anyway, I'm over talking. Sorry.
No, you're not. Well, and I want to dig into the songs themselves. I mean, the thing I really want to say about that is, when you listen to this record, I dare anybody to hear this record, go to Rainy Day Christian,
Mm,
and ask yourself how this was not a top 10 single. Because if ever a song was radio ready,
mm-hmm.
if ever a song should have been played every hour on
Well,
the hour, it
yeah,
was Rain Christian, if nothing else. And this record
sure.
was chock full of radio cuts. I mean, and the one thing, what I wanted to say about that is, you talked about the potpourri of influences.
Mm-hmm.
I think we also have to talk about the potpourri of people that were on this record
Yes.
that contributed to that potpourri. I mean, you had players from Seawind, you had Richard Page and Steve George from Mr.
Yes.
Mister doing
Mm-hmm.
background vocals, Bill
Mm-hmm.
and Tamara Champlin, like
Yes. Who was
voices,
pregnant
singers,
at the time of the session.
really.
Yeah, that was cool. And to have Pages, I mean, to have Richard Page uh,
Yes.
and Steve um, on the record. I was a fan of their music, and the producer, David Diggs, um, worked with them a lot, and worked with all the Seawind people too. So he was able to sort of corral all these people. And one name you didn't mention that cannot go unmentioned is Paul Jackson Jr. on guitar.
Yes.
And he was I mentioned him because of all of the players that were assembled for the record. And to David's credit and the label's credit, they asked me who I wanted to play on
They
the
did.
record, and they went out and found them. But the only person I could think of that I really wanted on the record was Paul Jackson Jr. His rhythm guitar is just awesome,
Yes.
and he agreed to do it, so that's great.
Well, and I also want to talk about, you had one of the few one of the few women musical directors in particularly Lisa Nelson co-wrote with you
Oh yeah.
on Since I Met Jesus. I mean, it's
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit about Lisa?
Sure. Well, basically, I met. Oh gosh, what a story. Um, I moved to Nashville October of '81, and right away there was this fledgling country television network called was it TNN,
Mm-hmm.
the Nashville Network. I believe it was TNN was starting up, and they had a show called Country Gospel, and
Yes.
they were looking for artists to appear on that show, but um, I had to appear on the show with a choir. They didn't want me by myself because, of course, I was Black, so I needed to come. And I was in Nashville a week. I didn't know anybody. I had met a young man named Everett Drake,
Yeah.
and Everett um, has since become one of my dearest friends, and he is the person I credit the most with introducing me to Nashville, because he took me around and introduced me to everybody.
Wow.
Well, I called Everett and said, I need a choir. And he said, I go to a church called Mount Pisgah United Methodist Church. They have a great choir and a great choir director, Derek Lee. And we can put a choir together for you. Well, he puts the choir together, but Derek was out of town. Derek was on the road. I want to say he might have been on the road with the happiest girl in the whole USA. No, because that would have been Everett. He was on the road with somebody, but he
Okay.
was not in town.
Okay.
And we needed a keyboard player. And I knew Lisa from the Bobby Jones
Yes.
entourage. And so I called and asked if she would, actually, I think I might have called Kim Fleming, who's also one of my oldest and dearest friends. And, she's 106. But don't tell her that. Don't tell her I said that. But she introduced me to Lisa. And Lisa came and played and directed the choir. And we did that show and became friends from there. When it came time to do the record, she brought me a song. And it was mostly finished. I think I just added a little this and a little that to it, but it was basically her song.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's another one. Gospel radio should have lapped that one up. In particular,
Yes.
that was Since I Met Jesus. Y'all need to go back and get that song out and listen to it again. And
Yeah.
somebody needs to resurrect it, because that song is a classic, just a classic. Those horns,
Yes.
the
Yes.
horns on that record
I just
are
love the whole. I still have such a visceral and magnificent memory of the recording process, because we did it in L.A. and uh, the Elwin Raymer, the head of the label, took me into his office before I left and said, "Okay, we're giving you $25,000 to do this record." And I had done my first record for 42, right? So I'm like, okay, all right. Um, but we went out, and David Diggs was magnificent and conscientious and a penny pincher. And we brought that record in for 26,500. And I remember weeping when I called the label, because I was so scared that we had gone over budget. And Raymer's voice on the other end of the phone was just like, he couldn't stop laughing. He was like, basically, we had budgeted about between 35 and 40,000 for the record, but we just told you 25, so you'd stay under that. So we could have spent more. But nevertheless, the whole process, the whole studio process, every musician, there were Lonnie Groves. I'm sorry, not Lonnie Groves. I can't even think of the singers now. Myrna Matthews.
Myrna Matthews, yep.
And
Myrna McCall, Marty McCall.
Who?
Marty McCall.
Marty McCall and Lehman.
Edie Lehman.
Edie Lehman, who went on to be a soap opera actress. But
Really?
these were the divas of background singing in LA. I'll never forget the session they came in to sing "Stand," and it was summertime when we cut the record, but they all came in furs, and they all, because the studios are so cold, and they just dropped their furs down around their ankles in the studio, and they sang, and they were just the sweetest things. And then they looked at their watches, just, oh, we would love to stay and chat, but we've got a Kenny Rogers at 2. We must go. So it was just stuff like that that happened that was just fabulous, I thought.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and let's talk about the writing. Like, what was inspiring you as you were writing these songs? Because I mean, again, the this is not conventional CCM or gospel material. I mean, I mean, when I was listening yesterday, getting ready for this, to Ebenezer,
Mm.
and I just went, who writes a song called Ebenezer? And two, who else could make it this relatable and understandable? Like, you
Yeah.
take what could be really complex,
Yes.
and
Because
you
some of the biblical themes are very complex and you have to break them down. But but Ebenezer in particular, um, gosh, these stories are so long, Tim, and I have to
just go for it.
um, the first time I ever came to Nashville was before I moved here, and I came here with Tammy Faye Baker to sing on the Grand Ole Opry, and she brought a trio of uh, 4 guys to sing background for her on the show. We got here, they put us up at the 12 Oaks Motel at 100 Oaks. It was a dive then. It still is.
Still is, yeah.
And I got to the room, unpacked, realized I'd left my black socks at home, and I was a stickler for my uniform, my outfit. So I ran to the mall to buy some dress socks. Walked in the mall, saw 2 people sitting at a card table at the entrance to the mall, signing people up to the KKK. And I had been in the process of divesting from PTL and looking for a place to go. So LA was really not an option for me because it was so much like home. I'm from the West Coast. New York scared me. So Nashville was very much on my radar as an option, a place to move. And that just settled it for me. No, I will not be moving to Nashville. Fast forward to a couple of years later, Ron Huff, Dan and David, their dad.
Rangers, orchestrators, yes.
Exactly. Called me. He was making a record. He had written a worship musical called Exaltation.
Yes.
And there was a song on it called Amen that he wanted me to sing. And he'd heard the first record, Looking Forward, and loved my voice and thought I'd be perfect for the project. And would I come to Nashville? And I needed money like a baby needed a bottle. But I just, the whole Nashville idea. But I said yes. He picked me up at the airport. He took me to his house, introduced me to his family, his wife. I want to say her name is Betty, but maybe it's Donna. I think it's Donna. Please excuse me. Sweetest lady. Cooked for me. I slept in a beautiful bed in a beautiful house that night. Got up the next morning, drove to the studio, and cut the song. But on the way to the studio, we passed a little church. He lives in Franklin, so I think it was on Highway 100. A little church. It was called Ebenezer, and he just said he knew that it was a black. I think might have been a missionary Baptist church.
Okay.
But he asked me, did I know what Ebenezer meant? And I told him I didn't. And he directed me to the scripture, to 1 Samuel chapter 7. He said, just read that and you'll get an understanding of but he basically synopsized, oh, is that a word?
It is now.
For me. And it just moved me, the whole idea of the whole meaning of Ebenezer, through all of the turmoil and through all of the war and through all of the whatever, the persecution that the children of Israel had gone through. God rescued them from that and took them to another place, but on the way there, he said, build me this monument to say, God brought us here.
Yes.
God has taken us to this point. That spoke to me, and I had to write it down. I had to memorialize it somehow. So that's where that song came from.
Well, this is, and I just want to read the first verse in the chorus. I mean, this is so brilliant. Nobody said that the road would be easy. Nobody said there would be no strife. But we've got a promise that we can hold on to, because when it's all over, we'll see Christ. So on through the struggle, we march to victory, reminded of those who've gone before, and not just for their sake, but because of the promise, we'll press toward the mark of the high calling. Lord, we've reached our Ebenezer. It's taken miles and years, and we've cried many tears. But Lord, we've reached our Ebenezer. Look how much you've taught us. Look how far you've brought us. But look how far we have to go.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's that's my motto.
Yeah.
It's, to me, it's not worth writing unless it can outlive you. It's not worth writing unless you're saying something. Words matter.
Words matter.
Yeah. So I listen to that even now, and sometimes some things I write and I finish them, and I say, okay, now that was cute, but that's not. I mean, I could probably do better. And then there are some things that happen that I listen to 20 years later or 30 years later, and I go, you know what? You said that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
This is a time, I mean, it's a timeless, I mean, I was listening to it yesterday. We're taping this the day after the election. And I was sitting there watching things go on, and I just went, Lord, I thought about this song that I had just listened to, and I went, my message in this moment. I mean,
Yes.
this song, it speaks. And I think this album, though, also is just chock full of those kinds of messages. I can do all things. Stand. I mean, this is such an album of encouragement and about fortitude, and you are such a wordsmith. And I think that's you when you said words matter. I thought about all of your songs that I know, and I just went, that's what makes them so powerful. I mean, just a few, and I'm jumping a little bit, and I didn't even tell you. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but when you said this, I immediately thought about Bring It to Jesus. Because just a few years after this album, you penned a song with Derek Lee and Raymond Brown called Bring It to Jesus that was such a huge hit in CCM world for Cynthia Clausen, and then a few years later, Bobby Jones and New Life took it to a whole another place.
Right.
But
and did you know that Philip Bailey from Earth, Wind & Fire recorded it?
In between those two, that's right.
Yeah. Well, the deal about Bring It to Jesus, I think, is my tombstone for my friend Raymond Brown, my memorial to him. When I moved to Nashville, he was the head writer at the company that I had signed to, and he was writing a lot for Cynthia Clausen. And I had heard his music through her, but he showed me some of his stuff, just him singing and playing piano, and he just completely blew my mind. He became a mentor for me because he was certainly a wordsmith. He loved melody as well. So the juxtaposition of melody and lyric was important to him. And he taught me so much over the years. But when he got, and he inspired me to be better, I think, as a writer. But what I would do is I'd go home and I'd write something and then think oh no, this is really brilliant. But then I'd be scared to show it to anybody because I didn't want to. It's like your baby, right? You don't want anybody to say your baby's ugly.
Yes.
So, but I sat on this song I had written all of it. I had written a good portion of it, but it just wasn't finished, and I couldn't figure out how to finish it. So necessity forced me to share it with him, to show it to him, and he immediately thought it was brilliant, which warmed my heart, because for him to say it was brilliant, it had to be. Um, but he also knew what the fix was. He knew how to finish it. He knew
Mm.
just the right lyric and just the right melody to 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 fix it. And we got about 75% of the way, and then I showed it to Derek,
Wow.
and Derek finished it. So
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Well, and and I think that brings us to an important point about I'm Walking, because that spirit of collaboration. I mean, you co-wrote quite a few. I mean, Use Me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, we talked about Since I Met Jesus. Now I Have a Song to Sing
Mm-hmm.
with Marvin Morrow. Like, talk
And
about.
and and I'm Walking was Marvin as well. So
That's right. That's right.
um, the the whole collaborative situation was started early. Um, I before PTL, I was in a group called New Hope, and we actually lived for 6 months in for a month and a half in Holland, and then we moved to a couple of weeks in Great Britain, and then we went to Scandinavia. We were based
Wow.
in Copenhagen, and from there we went all through Norway, Denmark, Sweden for about 4 months. And one of the guys in that group was the keyboard player. His name was Terry Peoples.
Yes.
And, but Terry was also a bass player. And after the whole New Hope tour ended, an opportunity came for me to go to PTL, and I was there for about a year. And then they needed a bass player, so I recommended Terry, and Terry
Wow.
got a gig as the bass player at PTL. And he knew that I was cutting a record, and he brought me a song. And basically, I helped him finish it. But the song was almost finished. That was um, um, uh-oh, uh-oh, I forgot the name of the song now. Not I Can Do All Things, but
Use me. Use
what's
me.
that?
Use me.
Use Me. That was his song, and I just loved. I like first person.
Mm-hmm.
I like to talk about what I'm doing. There's a lot of gospel that's out there that points fingers. It's like, this is what you need to be doing. This is what you ought to do. But people hear what you say, but they see what you do.
That's right.
So I like to talk about what I'm doing, and that's kind of the whole premise for I'm Walking. Marvin Morrow was a gifted songwriter in Nashville. Do you know who Keith Stegall is?
I know that name, and I don't
Keith
know why.
Stegall wrote "We're in This Love Together" for Al Jarreau,
Yes.
and then he became this huge record producer, produced Alan Jackson and uh, uh, lots of folks like that. But
Mm-hmm.
Keith was sort of a sojourner um, uh, songwriter back in the day, and Marvin was his great friend, and they wrote together. And Keith Stegall introduced me to Marvin, and Marvin just started bringing me songs. But he brought me um, the tune and the feel of I'm Walking, and
Wow.
I just was so blown away. But I got to fill in all of the, you know, I mean, he had no title, no lyrical direction. He just had a groove, but it was a funky groove.
And again, this is a rarity. The only person I can, I look at these things and try to make like a little line and go, okay, this happened here. Who came after that and did something kind of the only person I can identify that colored a song similarly. That's the only way I'll
Mm-hmm.
say it, because there's no comparison to you. But
Oh,
a
thank you.
person that colored similarly to you and did a similar type of song to I'm Walking was Daryl Coley.
Ah,
Daryl Coley's the only person I can really think of, particularly a male artist, that
that man, I just marvel at his gift, and such a sweet man. And I do not mean
was.
that in any other way but the way it's meant.
He was.
He was a beautiful soul.
He
but
was.
he would open his mouth and completely destroy me.
He was a killer.
Afraid so.
He
Yeah.
was vocally, he was a killer. But one
Hmm.
again,
But he also understood. I mean, now get it. I mean, I love Aretha because she was to me the perfect combination of delivering the message with all of the frills.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of singers I'm listening to these days are just frills. It's like they finish all of that, and I say, I'm very impressed with all of the runs and all of the whatever. But what were you saying, sweetie? What were you trying to tell me? Because I didn't get that.
Yeah.
But Daryl could do that.
Yes. I mean, Daryl really was, I think, in many ways, the template for, what we hear a lot of today, but what everybody lacks is his heart. That heart
Yes.
and that conviction and that belief. And he was also a wordsmith he also, I mean, I actually only thought about this in getting ready for our talk today. And I went, Daryl's the only other person I can think of that, and Daryl had a similar pen. He wrote the biblical story. He
Mm-hmm.
also wrote The Eye. He wrote The
Mm-hmm.
Eye. He's prepared,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't write that song, but he's preparing me. Those were his kinds of songs. So
Right.
but I'm
Right.
Walking was so, dare I use this word? It was so sassy. I don't know
It
if I
was
can
like,
use that
let me
word.
just tell you this. I had one shot. I knew I had one shot. And it was just like, okay, should you be more conservative with your shot? Should you go in a direction that um, will garner some ears or whatever, or should you just lay it all out on the line? And I made the decision to do what I did, and I've never regretted it.
Well, and you made such a funny connection. Again, no one in gospel would ever do this. The mention of Nancy Sinatra. The I mean, it's so clever. Everything about what you did on this song is so
Well,
unconventional.
I used to listen growing up. I used to. Oh, let me just tell you this quick story.
Yeah.
When I was a freshman in high school, the high school I went to was what they call a polytechnic school, and it was all guys. They had an all guys school and all girls school, and they taught you a trade and a craft in addition to the 3 R's. So, but this high school had the public broadcasting radio station um, in on campus. And so radio intrigued me, and I went and applied and got a position on at the radio station. And the director of the radio station got me a job working for the number one top 40 radio station in the city of Portland, KGW at the time.
Wow.
And I worked the request line at KGW for 4 years. And I would, in the course of my day, have to throw away albums. Just
Wow.
promotional albums would come in, and they didn't listen to any of it. And one day I went into the program director's office and said, "Would you mind if I looked through some of these records before you throw them away?" He says, "Look through whatever you want, keep whatever you want, and whatever you don't keep, throw away." That's how I started my record collection. I probably have about 4,000 records now
Wow.
of all stripes. And I would take those records home and listen to them. I don't care what they were.
Yes.
Just listen and read the credits. And that was my introduction to um, the world of radio and to the world of records and
Wow.
the world of artists and musicians and engineers and studios, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I mean, this is the other thing I think that your music drips with, and that is, I can tell that you were curious.
Mm.
That curiosity it's why this is such a rich potpourri. That's the word. I mean, you use it really is, because I can tell that you listened to a lot of different things. I can
Yeah.
tell that you
And
read.
you listen to these concept records, and that have commentary and spoken word on them, and then they go into a song, or there's background noise on some of the songs, or what would be considered an outtake on some records, but they left it in, and that becomes the classic of the record. You know, I wanted my records to live like that. I wanted my record to kind of breathe and be real, and not just be me
Yes,
going to the studio, you know, singing 10 songs down. You
that's
know.
right. Well, and we talked about some of the challenges at the front end of the interview, some of the challenges with marketing this record, but I also
Mhm.
want to talk about some of the things that you did do to promote this project. I mean, one of the things that think the first way I heard this record before I actually owned it was I saw a concert that you did with Cynthia Clausen
Mm,
on the PTL network that they filmed. And
yes.
I've got a little piece of it still on VHS that I transferred a few weeks ago, but I've only got like the first 3 songs. Um, but
I've
I know
got
you
that VHS tape somewhere.
got to get it transferred.
I know.
Um, but I know you had like television opportunities in promoting this record.
Well, not really, but
Okay.
well, no, I shouldn't say that. There was a Christian television station in Chicago that would call me, and I'd go up and sing. Did that a lot. Met Jesse Dixon there, and a bunch of other
Nice.
people in Chicago. And um, uh, there was a TV station in Toronto um, that not a station, but a television show called 100 Huntley Street
Were
that
you on
I'd go up
100
and do a lot. And there
Wow.
were other, you know, like regional television stations Christian stations that I'd go and sing for. But um, you know, and early on, Thurlow Spur
Mhm.
and his organization managed and booked me, which is of course illegal in every state but North Carolina, which is where the companies were based. Um, but after that situation ended, my friend Mike McKinney in Louisville, Kentucky, who who was managing Cynthia Clausen at the time,
Yes.
or booking her, I'm sorry, took me on, and we became great friends. So that was a beautiful experience, and he kept me working. And Tim, one of the really weird and wonderful things about what we did, what I was able to do over the years that I toured, is I sang in all kinds of churches. I
Yeah.
sang in mostly white churches, but I sang in a lot of black churches um, and churches of every denomination. I'll never forget singing in a Mennonite church and singing the first 3 songs in the concert and finishing, and you know, they just kind of looked at me like, okay. And I powered through and finished the whole concert. And after it was over, I spent maybe 4 hours in a receiving line with people just weeping and crying. And oh, it was just the most beautiful thing. And I was like, well, you could have let me know that in the concert. That's just not their way.
Right.
So, you know, yeah, it was a beautiful sojourn.
Right.
I'll never forget. Oh, I could go on, but there, back in the New Hope days, we went to a church in Virginia, and um, the policy with New Hope was we got to a city, we set up our equipment in the church, we did a sound check, then families would meet us in the church and take us individually to their homes, feed us dinner, show us where we're going to sleep that night. We'd come back to the show, then we go sleep home with our hosts and sleep and get up the next morning, travel to the next city.
Wow.
When we got to Virginia, I was told I had a hotel room, which was fabulous for me because me being in homes consisted of me staying up to 3 o'clock in the morning most of the time with people wanting to touch my hair and wanting to know what black people smell like, and
Mm.
all that kind of stuff. So, which
Fun times.
was my cross to bear, but it was okay. But so I had a hotel room, right? I go back in time for the concert. The first 3 songs of the concert, I did the lead vocals on. And we got halfway through the 3rd song, and the pastor of the church stood up and said, I cannot take this anymore. The concert is stopped. We cannot allow this. And they made us shut down and leave the church because they did not want black people singing in their church.
Wow.
And fast forward to same state, different city, but in my solo career, showed up at a church to do a concert. Derek and I were together. Derek will tell you. And he was my running buddy for a lot of the times. No tracks, just he on piano and me on vocals. And we would go and kill him. But we showed up at the church and they wouldn't let us in. They kept trying to direct us to the back door because that's where all the deliveries are made. And I kept trying to tell people, well, my name is Bob Bailey. I'm, the singer for. Eventually, the pastor, came and let us in. And the end of that story was it was a wonderful concert. Again, we must have spent 2 hours afterwards talking to people and, all that kind of stuff. But it's just the groundbreaking aspect of it was a little maddening at times.
I'm sure. And to see now, that it's still ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
It's still ongoing. Things have changed in some ways, but
yeah.
We
some things have changed, most things have not.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into a whole thing, but it's like to look at particularly contemporary Christian music today, and there are still basically the same, can we say smattering, this small number of Black artists that find acceptance in this field, despite the fact that there are plenty of Black artists making records that fit in that format.
Right. And there's no conduit for artists and creative people who want to express their faith.
Yes.
And stay in the community. There's no way to do that. It's like we're forced to go outside to do it, and then of course we're ostracized and criticized because we went outside.
Yes.
But it's okay. It's to me. I mean, I agonized over that for years because I got saved when I was 8. I've been a Christian most of my life, and I love the Lord, and I always have, and I always will, and all of those things. But it's like the more I see of the church, the quote unquote church, the more the more I want no part of it. And that hurt my heart for a number of years, but I'm learning to release that now and let it go because other opportunities have presented themselves. And we're in church right now.
Absolutely.
The church is wherever we are.
That's right.
So being in a building, I'll never forget going to a church I used to sing in Scottsdale, Arizona. They had their own bowling alley. They were self-contained. They didn't need the world for anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, you walk outside the doors of the church and there were people laying on the ground, trying to find a place to sleep. It's like, What is your mission? Why are we here? Are we here to build bowling alleys, or are we here to save the world?
That's right.
Are we here to preach the gospel to the world? We're not doing any of that.
No.
I'm sorry. I'm stepping off the soapbox now.
Nope. Well, and I just want to, say though that those are the things that are, I think, some of the reasons, because there's an interesting, I don't want to sound crazy or paranoid here or like, reading too much into things, but I feel like it's evident from listening to your music where your heart is, and that your heart is for people. Heart is for encouragement, not for this new version of kingdom building, kingdom building, which is really just capitalism on crack.
Sure.
And so I think that there's also like I've had this conversation with too many artists who feel similarly and have faced some of the same obstacles, whether it be racism, sexism, weightism. There's also just a very different worldview that ties all of these artists together. I feel like, these people are not, we'd like to think they're stupid in some ways, but they're not. They're actually quite clever, and they have some sense of intuition enough to know that's a little different. that's
Hmm.
a little different, and I don't think we're going to really give that much of a platform. And
Yeah.
so I think, I'm really grateful that records like this still exist in this form, because we had one of the first shows I did, we talked about the music of Terry DeSerio,
Oh yeah,
another
I remember
great
her.
progressive, social justice leaning
Hmm.
artist that
Hmm.
by some miracle of God happened to get two records out, back
Right.
in the 80s. And
Hmm.
thankfully these things live as documents for
Yes,
us.
it's like if you can press them, if you can get it to the point of pressing them, then they can't undo it. They can't
No,
they can't take it away. I just wanted to mention something about um, how things are formed for me. My experiences form me. After that New Hope tour, I went back to Eugene, Oregon, where I was living at the time, and got a job at Wendy's and worked there for about 5 months. And I had a manager who was 16. I think I had turned 21 on the road. So, and he was like a little Hitler. And I'll never forget the day that I went into to work, and I had scrubbed the floors and washed the windows, which was sort of my job. They wouldn't let me cook. And he came back and said, "You need to re-scrub the floors and redo the windows." And I put the mop down and said, "I'm done." And drove home on the last fumes of gas that I had in my little 64 Plymouth Fury, and got to the trailer I was living in Eugene, that cost me $50 a month in rent, and I was 3 months behind. To a ringing phone that said, "Can you come be at PTL
wow.
and be a PTL singer?" Well, we've heard about you. We want you to come to PTL and be a PTL singer, but we need to hear you. So I go to the youth pastor of a church I was working with, and he pulled out his reel-to-reel tape machine, and we recorded 10 songs, and we Federal Expressed it to
Wow.
PTL on Wednesday, and on Friday I was on a plane to PTL, to a whole new world that I didn't even know existed. And I was so euphoric about being in a safe place, being around a bunch of Christians and people who were kingdom building and doing it on a massive scale, that for a while I didn't really see the reality of what was going on there.
Yeah.
But eventually, um, it came to light,
Yes.
and the Spirit said, "I need for you to go." And I was like, "No, I can't do that." I'm going to Kroger to buy groceries, and I'm having people, yelling, "Oh my God, it's that colored guy from PTL! Oh my God!" I'm famous. I'm a star. I can't give that up. And the next thing I knew, it was as if my father had put his wingtip shoe in the crease of my tuchus, and I was on the street,
Wow.
out of there, because the Spirit said, "It's time for you to go," and not a moment too soon.
Yes.
Shortly after I left is when the fall came. So,
Yes. Yeah.
but all of those experiences, we could do 8 shows about all of the crap that I saw while I was there, under the guise of holiness, under the guise of godliness, under the guise of whatever. And these are human beings, so
That's
you
right.
got to take your lumps where you take them. And I'm certainly not perfect, um, but the whole idea of telling somebody where they need to be, and then looking at what it is that they're doing, and it is so far
Yeah.
from what God wants us to be doing. But that formed me. That formed a message in me. It was like, okay,
Yes.
if if ever if you whatever you are going to be, Robert, you need to be true to yourself. You need to be who you are, and you need to let all these experiences inform you, but you don't need to let them defeat you. So
Well,
all of the stuff that uh, I wrote Rainy Day Christian
yes.
shortly after I was fired.
Wow.
And I was hurt.
Of
And
course.
and and I mean, what if you're inside the tent? You have lots of love and lots of attention and lots of affection and lots of support. As soon as you cross the threshold of the door on your way out, they never knew you.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that you bring up the concert at PTL, because after the fact, when that record came out, when I'm Walking came out, and after it was nominated for a Grammy, then then the world was talking about it, or enough of the world was talking about it, and someone from PTL called and asked if I would come and be a part of that concert,
Wow.
and I chose that moment to play them that song
Yes.
and to tell them about themselves.
Yes. Well, and I think that this is also, I mean, the difference I think between this record, and looking forward is that I can hear the emergence of that heartbreak. What came after that? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like you are on these songs, you are completely cracked open,
Mm-hmm.
pure heart. And the first record is joyous and exuberant, and
Mm-hmm.
we hear your spectacular voice. But on this record, it is like you are fully open.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, connect that to what you're saying. I mean, your experiences do shape, and it
Yeah.
did. I
And
mean,
during the period of that record, I was also um, struggling with personal issues, my sexuality, and with um, the juxtaposition of that and what my calling was, and so basically being thwarted from what my calling
yes,
was because of my sexuality.
that's right.
And I believe that caused me was was a contributing factor for my descent into drugs, which
Mm,
I was not. um, I, during the making of that record, I was smoking marijuana,
okay.
but it got a whole lot worse after that. So there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of self realization uh, 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 taking place there. A lot of angst uh, during that period of time. So
Yes. Well, I'm so grateful that you've shared so much of this. I didn't know how far we were going to go today. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm so honored and thrilled that we got to break this much open. And
well, thank you. Opportunities like this are rare for me. Just I don't seek them out. Um, but when they happen, it's like I've got to say everything I need to say this one time, because who knows if I get a chance to say it again. But I'm just really thrilled that you would be interested, or anybody would be interested in hearing what's happening with me, and grateful for the opportunity to be able to share with you today.